Today we're going to talk about patterns. So reading a pattern is kind of like reading a math book. It's like a whole different language, but once you get it, you can do anything. So first off, I'm going to teach you how to read the packaging because that is most important, especially when you're buying your fabric. So the front just shows you what the pattern looks like, or what it's supposed to look like. The back is where all the important information is. First off, sizing. This sizing does not match dress sizes or pant sizes that you normally wear. Pattern sizing is a world all its own. So you have to kind of figure out where you stand just by experimentation, cutting out patterns, making a mock-up and fitting it to yourself. And sometimes these are never right. Like I'm never always an 8 or always a 10. I'm always like, oh, my bottoms are a 10 and my top is an 8 and I just have to piece things together. Okay? It's not always an easy ride, but you have to figure that out for yourself. So essentially on the top flap or somewhere on the back, there will be size guides. So it'll tell you, oh, for size 6, you should be this bust, this waist, this hip. Roughly, so you can kind of get an idea of what size you should be. On the back, it'll tell you what fabrics the pattern recommends. So this one is designed for 2-way stretch or 4-way stretch only. This is a stretch material pattern. You cannot use a non-stretchy fabric. It just won't work. This pattern suggests using brocades, crepe satin, some other things, I don't know what they are, sateen, satin, silky types, taffeta, blah blah blah. And then it even gives you recommendations for like trim and all that stuff. So if you ever have questions about what fabrics you should use for what patterns, it tells you right on the pattern. Going back to stretch patterns, on the top it'll give you a stretch guide. So this is how much your fabric has to stretch in order for this pattern to work. Take your salvage edge, place it over that diagram through that black area. And then holding the one edge, you need to make sure that you can drag your fabric to stretch along that entire length that it recommends. Make sense? And different stretch patterns will have different recommendations. So make sure you get a fabric that stretches the amount you need. Below your fabric recommendations, you get a little chart. This chart tells you how much fabric to buy for what pieces. So it'll tell you A, B, C, or D, that's A, B, C, or D, the possible combinations you can make from the pattern, how much fabric you're gonna need for each one. Patterns with more complicated pieces will give you, again, A, B, C, and here it'll tell you A bodice, lining, skirt, scarf, interfacing, trim. So it'll tell you every piece how many yards of what to get. So you have no guesswork. You're fine, you're perfect, okay? Just follow your pattern. Now we're going to move on to the actual instructions of the pattern. Usually they come with 2 sheets. If it's a really simple pattern, it'll only come with 1 sheet. And you get this lovely scramble of a foreign language that you really don't understand. First off, it should tell you what the finished garment will look like. And again, your A, B, C, or D, so you know what one you want to make, what guides you're going to follow. Below, it tells you all of your pattern pieces. Whatever this set includes in here is listed in here. So if you want just A, you're going to cut out all the pieces that say A. That says B, you're not going to need that. That says C or D, you're not going to need that. It tells you exactly what pieces of pattern you're going to need. This piece of information, 1 box or however many boxes, is usually given to you on every pattern. It just tells you how to read the pattern. So if you've never done it before, you just need to look at this and memorize the symbols. So it'll tell you this little arrow means the grain line. This little rectangle is the fold line, buttonhole marking, button marking, notches and symbols, seam allowance, to shorten, to lengthen, double thickness, circle layout. Just things that the pattern will say, a pattern piece will say. So on your pattern, it'll tell you the 10, it's the sleeve for A, B, C, and D. I'm gonna need this for all of the ones. So if you look at all these symbols, these circles, these triangles, this line, these lines, if you don't know what any of those mean, It's this top section of the pattern that explains to you what all of those mean. And they're pretty much universal for every pattern. So if you know these and memorize these, this whole front page is just repetition. You don't need it. Just learn those symbols and you can go on to read your patterns with ease. And then again, on this plethora of information, it'll actually tell you how to lay out all your pattern pieces on the fabric to get them all to fit. We're turning it over. Again, more sewing information, the sewing key. Right side, wrong side interfacing, right side lining, wrong side lining. They all are color coded or pattern coded. And again, if you memorize those, they're universal in every pattern. So when you see different colors or different patterns on the drawings, you'll know exactly what they're talking about because it's always the same. And now we get into the actual instructions of how to sew. And most times they give you beautiful, lovely pictures with just a little bit of words. This is where it's kind of like trying to read a math book and figure out how to do math by reading a book. It's the same kind of thing. They give you a picture and some words, and you gotta kind of figure out how to make that work with a real 3D piece of fabric. But if you practice and you read it and just take your time and think about it, it makes total sense. Pin bodice front to front, matching notches, stitch. That's the picture, the bodice front to the front. It even tells you number 1 and number 2 to correlate back to this picture telling you and numbering the pattern pieces. And every once in a while you'll get like a vocabulary term. So like, where did I see that vocabulary term? Slip stitch. It's in all uppercase letters and then it tells you what to do. Usually your pattern will come with like a glossary of terms that it knows you're gonna need for this instructions. Oh, right, okay. So here we are, back on the front, the first page with like all the basic instructions. There's a little box that says glossary. Narrow hem and slip stitch are in there. So it knows that these are terms it's gonna ask you to do when making this specific pattern, and it tells you what it means. And if all else fails, you don't know what slip stitch means from the words, just go look it up on YouTube. Someone will show you how to do it. So that's generally a really quick overview of how to read the actual pattern. Now to give you an example, I'm gonna go through and use the same pattern and kind of build it and follow the instructions with you and show you what they mean. So for the purposes of this, I'm gonna use the pattern itself to pin it together as it's instructing. But if it makes you feel better, you can just imagine these are pieces of fabric. Step number 1, pin bodice front 1 to front 2 matching notches, stitch. Bodice 1 to bodice 2, okay? This pattern is very nice. It actually gives you different lines for your different cup size. So you're cutting depending on your boobie size. So we're gonna assume that the front, where I can read it, is the front side of the fabric. So you always pin right sides together. So the right side to the right side. You're gonna match that notch to the other notch. You're gonna do that first and pin that into place. It's okay if it doesn't line up on one side because it's meant for different cup sizes. It's not always gonna line up for every person. Boop. Okay, just like that. Step 2, pin bodice side front 3, 4, or 5 to side front 6. Matching notches, stitch. So here's page 6. It says 3, 4, or 5 depending on your cup size. So that's gonna dictate it's 3, 4, or 5 for this specific pattern. So again, right sides together. The notches, you need to find the same notch, so number 8, so I'm using pattern size 8. This notch to notch 8, pin that in place, and then work the fabric around the rest of the curves. Ta-da! Step 3, pin bodice front and front. Wow, that was confusing. Pin bodice front and front to bodice side front and side front. Matching notches and seams, stitch. Okay, so we're essentially putting the two pieces we just made together. Right sides together. You're gonna wanna match the notches. this one here. You want to match the notches first before you start pinning things in between. Notch 8 to notch 8. Now this does not line up. This is a lot less fabric than this. But that's because this was made for my cup size. Maybe it's bigger, maybe it's smaller. But you need that curve and that extra fabric to make sure you have space for your boob. So that's called ease. You want to ease this into the other one. So you can kind of gather it up. And stretchy fabric, you're going to want to stretch, pull it tight until it's even, stretching one fabric more than the other, and then pinning it into place. But that extra stretch room is what's going to allow your chest to be the right shape. And there we go. We have the entire front of our leotard bodysuit thing put together. Here's an example of the top piece that I've made. And I use these exact same patterns. This one that was too big and had excess that I needed to ease into this one that was too small. That same idea, and I had stitched them together. So that way, when I put it on me, see how it buckles and there's like room for a boob? That's how that works. The instructions carry on to show you how to do the back. Put the shoulder seams together, sew up the back or the front depending on where you want the zipper. Add the collar, add a zipper. That's still the zipper. Still the zipper. It's even showing you what zipper foot to use. Sewing up the bottom of the bodysuit underneath the zipper. Top stitching the zipper. That slip stitch thing we found out. This collar and zipper C and D. This is a different bodysuit made a different way for A and B. So depending on what bodysuit you're making, you're gonna stop and start the different directions. Does that make sense? It's showing you how to finish the legs if you're doing one without a leg. And then it continues on to show you how to make the leg if you're doing the full bodysuit. Ta-da! I hate to say this, but it's just practice. It's like doing math. Someone gives you an equation and you're like, what the F does that mean? But then the teacher explains it to you and you can plug in different letters and you can use that equation for a lot of different things. Same idea with patterns. You just have to understand the basic concept and you can make anything. I was a math kid, okay? I did really, really well in math. It clicked really easily for me, so I think that's why pattern making clicks really easy for me. If you didn't do well in math, I am sorry. This is probably gonna be another thing you're gonna struggle with a little bit, but it's just practice. You just have to practice with it and learn the terminology and the pictures and the words and the language that they use. And then you'll get it. It's just practice. Just keep going. Try the same pattern over and over again, or try different patterns. See if a stretch pattern versus a non-stretch pattern will work better for you. Practice. I'm sorry. That's the only way to get better. Now that I went over this video and I'm like thinking about it in my head, I don't think it really helped anyone, but maybe it did. All right, that's it. I'll see you next time. Bye. Bloop. Oh, we're filming. Strap. You know what's funny? Me staring at my ring light, and when I close my eyes, I can see the Eye of Sauron in my mind. Because you know how light affects your pupil even if you close your lids? So like the ring in my eye is yellow and the middle is black, and it just looks like the Eye of Sauron. And it makes me kind of happy and terrified at the same time. Okay, now that we're not on manual focus, we're on autofocus. Let's see if this is better.